state, federal, private, and nonprofit sectors. Early on, she realized her passion lies in working with private landowners to conserve wildlife habitat and farmland. She joined the MVCT, Mississippi Valley Conservancy, in 2007. Abbie's been a Vernon County landowner since 2011. She and her partner Adam spend as much time outdoors on their land as they can. They keep busy with cutting firewood, gardening, hiking with dogs, their dogs Hazelnut, Frank, and Sophie, and managing their land with prescribed burns, timber stand management, and endless invasive species control. So I'll turn it over to Abbie. Thanks much.
Thanks everybody. Great to see you all here tonight. How's the volume? Can everybody hear me okay?
No.
Louder. You can get closer to your
Testing. I'll just keep talking until, there we go. Can everybody hear me now? Thank you all for coming out this evening to learn about conserving land from beyond the grave. I'm going to start by talking about some of the big picture things. What is a land trust? What is Mississippi Valley Conservancy? What are some of the land use changes that we expect to see in this great area? And distill it down into what a person can do on their property. And I am assisted this evening by Tom Lukens, who is a local landowner who has protected his land with a conservation easement with Mississippi Valley Conservancy. We're actually celebrating the 10-year anniversary of that conservation easement just this year. Land conservation. There is something that Mississippi Valley Conservancy and Valley Stewardship Network have in common, and that is we give a voice to the voiceless, the species, the wildlife that inhabit this area. They don't have a choice in what we do as far as land use. They don't have a choice in what happens to their habitat, so it's our job to make good decisions, not only for the wildlife and habitats that inhabit this area, but also for our own species, for our current generations and for future generations. For more than 27 years, Mississippi Valley Conservancy has been connecting people, dreams, communities, and habitats with the common goals of protecting this landscape that we all love. We work in 9 counties. A land trust is a private, non-profit organization. We are non-governmental. We're established to protect land and water resources for public benefit, which doesn't mean that land is open to public access, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. We're an independent organization governed by a board of directors made up of local people from the 9 counties that we work in. To date, over 61 million acres have been protected by 1,200 land trusts nationwide. To date, we have protected 26,000 acres in this area. The majority of that is through private conservation easements with private landowners. We've also made about 7,000 acres open to public access for hiking, hunting, fishing, paddling, and other outdoor nature-based recreational activities. Our mission includes ecological restoration. Our nature preserves are used to demonstrate ecological restoration techniques. We also do environmental education, all for the goal of having healthy communities.
Abbie, do you want to move forward a little because you're blocking
Oh,
out?
sorry.
There you go, that's a very small.
Land trust priorities. Nationwide, wildlife species are declining. Some species are increasing in populations, and a lot of species are decreasing. The #1 cause of wildlife loss is habitat loss. We are losing farmland. Everything that we lose, whether habitat or farmland, affects air quality, water quality, quality of life. Our landscape is facing tremendous development pressure. Today, our population in Wisconsin is 5.9 million. In 2030, it's estimated to be 6.4 million. Every year, 30,000 acres of Wisconsin crop and pasture land is lost to other land uses. Prairies and savannas are a good example of a habitat type that 200 years ago was prevalent throughout this area. Oak savannas, today, we have less than 1/100th of 1%, not even a whole percent, less than 1 1/100th of what used to be here is still here. To give you an idea of the development pressure that this area will be facing, we're in a unique area where we have, hold on, I have a pointer, the Twin Cities, Chicago, Milwaukee, and we're right here at the heart in between. This is what the housing density looked like in 1940. It's fairly sparse. 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 2000, 2010, 2020, and here's the projection for 2030. So as you can see, the habitat loss that we currently experience is only going to increase. We as a species have a long history of overconsumption, but we have learned from the past. We have learned from our mistakes and recognized that some things can't be restored once they're lost. Asphalt is the land's last crop. We all have an idea of what we do not want this landscape to look like in the future. And I do want to clarify, Mississippi Valley Conservancy is not opposed to development. We are not opposed to mining. But we believe that there are resources in this area that are worthy of protecting, and that those areas that have prime farmland soils are the sites that should be conserved for future farmland use. The sites with the most diverse native prairies and savannas and woodlands should be conserved for future use, or for future benefit of wildlife. Here's an example of a local quarry right outside of a family farm where these quarrying operations have affected air quality, water quality, the sound. There's a lot of noise produced, and this is a site that was designated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture as having prime farmland soils and farmland soils of statewide importance. Those soils are gone. They cannot be restored. When reclamations occur, they bring in topsoil from other locations. They move it from the quarrying operation to attempt to reconstruct what was removed. When we talk about farmland preservation, there are ways to farm land that are sustainable and healthy for the soils, and there are ways and practices that cause erosion and gullying. And the same is true for logging activities. There's a good way and there's a poor way to do these activities. Overall, this landscape contains a wealth of natural resources worthy of protecting. And so the question is, how can we protect it after we are gone? A conservation easement is a voluntary legal agreement that places restrictions on future land use to ensure that these natural resources stay in place far into the future. Which brings me to Tom Lukens and Pam Saunders' property right here in Vernon County, 83 acres. 10 years ago, come on up, Tom. 10 years ago, they reached out to Mississippi Valley Conservancy to protect their land, specifically because they recognized that there are land uses and activities that they didn't want to see on their property.
Yeah, why did I want to put an easement on the property? Well, it was to protect the critters. You know, what made me fall in love with the property was how much diversity there was. The beaver and the birds and the snakes and the turtles and the frogs, and so you know, I was in love with the place, and so it was the critters that made me fall in love with it, and it really, after you put in a bunch of work trying to enhance and the rest of it, then it's to take this step just only made sense. We run a small cabin business, and we have created a mission statement, which is to protect and enhance biodiversity and carrying capacity and create a means to share it. So, you know, it fit really well with MVC, and we just it's a decision I'm so happy to have made. This was just all corn. This was a wall of corn, and this was all corn here. This is now prairie. This has now been planted to prairie. So it's just been fun, and Mississippi Valley Conservancy has been a really good partner in the whole thing. Yeah, it's an overview. They've allowed me to make wetlands. This is constructed wetlands. There's a mile of the West Fork that runs through the place, so it had a lot of potential. But it was really pretty beat up when we got it, and 22 years later, it's certainly supporting a lot more wildlife.
So how does it work? Oh,
Yeah.
Go for it.
Or you could
Come out. Go
This
for
way.
it. Yeah, there you go.
a conservation easement is a voluntary agreement. It is not a requirement. It's something that people enter into because it's something that they believe in. It's a written document. The restrictions are agreed upon between the landowner and the conservancy based on the landowner's wishes and the conservancy's requirements through state and federal statute. It's recorded at the Register of Deeds, so regardless of who owns a property in the future, the conservation easement stays in place. Future owners are bound by the restrictions that you place on your land, and the land is still utilized as you would otherwise. It can be sold, it can be passed on to heirs. There are a number of misconceptions about conservation easements. I mentioned earlier, public access is one of the biggest ones. Public access is not a requirement of a conservation easement. Ownership is retained. Mississippi Valley Conservancy doesn't own your property. Land uses are specified, whether it's things like grazing, farming, leasing the land, living on the land. Most people do live on their property with a conservation easement. That doesn't change. Property taxes are another area of the big misconceptions, in that if your property is currently taxed as agricultural land, or if you're in the managed forest law program, chances are entering into a conservation easement won't change that. If the land use doesn't change, then your tax valuation doesn't change. So property taxes typically do not change with a conservation easement unless you're reassessed as a commercial or residential property. Income taxes. I am not qualified to tell you anything about income taxes. I encourage you to talk with your accountant. There is a federal income tax incentive for landowners who convey a conservation easement. Every easement is different, every property is different, and every person's personal income tax situation is different. So how that will affect you is something that your accountant or attorney would need to speak to. The valuation of an easement is determined by an independent appraiser, and the tax deduction can be spread over up to 15 years, again, depending on your personal situation. So I do have a handout here behind Sarah with more information about the income tax incentive. A conservation easement can also help reduce heirs' tax burden when land is left to your heirs. Costs. Perpetuity is a long time. There is a legal requirement that any land trust that accepts a conservation easement is legally required to set aside funds to ensure the capacity to monitor and enforce that conservation easement in perpetuity. We do not charge a fee for a conservation easement, but we do ask landowners to contribute a suggested donation towards those costs. Our board of directors makes the decision every single year to allocate funds into our easement stewardship fund to help keep the amount that we're asking from landowners as low as we possibly can. And what most landowners will do is pledge a small amount over a number of years to help cover those costs. Considerations for a conservation easement. The single biggest factor in a conservation easement is to determine what are your wishes for the future of your land. Step one is to identify what land trust works in your area. Right here in Vernon County, Mississippi Valley Conservancy works in this area. The Prairie Enthusiasts works in this area for sites that have prairies and savannas. And we are the two primary land trusts for this area. The first step is to reach out to your local land trust and schedule a site visit, which I'm going to pick on Tom here in a minute about his experience with that very first site visit on his property. When we do the site visit, we are looking for two things. One is to learn about the resources of your property and to determine if your property is eligible for a conservation easement. The second primary thing with that site visit is to meet with you and talk about your wishes to make sure a conservation easement is a good fit for what you want for the land. We talk about future land use changes. What is your vision for what the future of the property might hold? If your vision includes having a number of home sites for your heirs, a conservation easement might not be a good fit. If your vision for the land is to keep it from being subdivided, then a conservation easement is a good fit. We also talk about the timing of the next steps on that conservation easement. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tom to share his experience of the site visit to his property where we talked about wishes for the land and looked at all of the natural resources.
When I first bought the property 22 years ago, I had a friend suggest to me, why don't you put a conservation easement on it, and I couldn't hear it. I had just plunked down the most money I'd ever put on anything, and it took me 12 years to come around to finally saying this was a good idea. And by that time I had, done a lot of stream bank work and planted prairie and put in snake hibernacula and turtle escape logs and all this fun, good stuff. It just, to protect it in perpetuity just made really good sense. And as I mentioned, we run a small cabin rental business with just 3 facilities, and so I had some pretty particular requirements for the easement. I needed to be able to continue to operate that business, to haul kayaks back and run a UTV if I needed to, and do all these things. And so, but Mississippi Valley Conservancy was great to work with. All these specifics. I wanted to keep some ag ground. I wanted to graze because I've been grazing goats and sheep for invasive control. So the several things that I had to customize the easement, and that's the thing with MVC. You can customize it based on your own desires, what your plans are for the property and the rest of it, and it was great to work with. I have there's a standard easement, but it's also quite customizable, and it was just it was a pleasure to work through all those different aspects. I wanted to be able to expand the facilities if I wanted to grow the business, and that got written into the easement. I wanted to create some wetlands and some prairie, and of course that was just fine. I wanted to put up some wildlife blinds. I wanted to have a primitive campsite. All these little things, some of which I will never do, but they're all written in, and MVC was wonderful to work with, and all the flexibility that they gave us, and it just turned out to be a slam dunk. And basically it was to protect all the work that had been done. But that first site visit with Abbie, here my mission had been to protect and enhance biodiversity and carrying capacity. And when they did their walkover, and when you walk with somebody as knowledgeable as Abbie, it's pretty amazing. But at the time, for that little 87-acre property, it was ranked way high in the total diversity for plants and animals. So it was really gratifying for me to think that my efforts were recognizable, that going from corn and some beat out ground to prairie with some 60 native species and the rest of it. It was I felt really good to have that site visit and to be told that you're ranked way high in diversity, which just meant that what I'd been doing was working. And these folks have helped me with ideas, and it's been a great deal. Whether it's invasives control or plant and prairie, it's just been fun all along, and they've been great partners. So, like I say, it took me 12 years to come around to the idea that that was mine, this, because it was my money, didn't have anything to do with it. It was about protecting it for the future, and I got 2 kids, and they can't divide that property. They gotta get along, or they're gonna have to bail on it and sell it to somebody who will protect it. And I got no problem with that. I met with them, we've discussed it, they know exactly what's going on. So again, it was a wonderful open discussion with MVC and myself and Pam and I as property owners, and I count it as one of the best things I ever did. So.
So some of the things that to take into consideration when entering into a conservation easement, we have a worksheet that landowners fill out with their wishes for the land. One of the hardest parts about the easement development is trying to keep it flexible, not knowing what is the future of this area. We don't know what crop will be the primary crop for Vernon County 100 years into the future. We don't know what the demand will be. So it's written to be flexible, but at the same time having restrictions to prevent the uses that you don't want. There's a lot of back and forth. Once the conservation easement is drafted, we go back and forth to make sure that a landowner and Mississippi Valley Conservancy are both comfortable with the easement restrictions. Considerations for those restrictions. Here you can see designated zones. So the cross-hatching up here, this is a building zone. Within that zone on this specific property, there is a farmhouse, corn crib, chicken coop, barn, all of your typical farm infrastructure. Within that building zone, that's the area with the least amount of restrictions in that easement. So as far as future uses go, buildings can be expanded, they can be removed, additional buildings can be built, utilities, solar panels, things like that can all be added as long as they are within that zone. The cross-hatching you can see on the agricultural field is the agricultural zone. That's where agricultural activities are allowed on the property. And when I say activities are allowed, that doesn't mean that a future landowner has to do those activities. A person could buy this property and say, I'm not a farmer, I don't want to farm, and I'd like to plant these fields to trees. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that approach. The conservation easement does not require you to do certain activities. It only restricts what you can't do. Outside of the 2 zones is the forested areas, and those are areas where agricultural use is prohibited. Building construction is prohibited, but the timber can be harvested according to a sustainable forest management plan. Other activities to think about are utilities, trails, future uses. Every site is different. Every conservation easement is different. Scale of an activity is important. There are ways for livestock to be on the land in a way that increases your biodiversity through managed rotational grazing. And there are ways for livestock to be on the land in such a way that they damage water resources or air quality or cause soil loss. So it's important that the conservation easement take into account what is the scale and scope of those activities that you're planning. Personal considerations on Tom's property. This was a unique site, and as he shared, they have the business, the cabin rental, they did solar panels, wetland restorations. The conservation easement was written to be flexible to allow all of those different activities. And here's a shot of some of the many things that Tom and Pam have done on the property. Tom, do you want to talk a little bit about all of these activities? Wetland restoration, beaver dam analogs, goats, not here for commercial goat meat production, but here to help control invasive species.
Yeah, the stream bank restoration, I think we've done a half a mile of stream bank work along the river. This photo was taken the night before we had a flood. The very next morning, the water was up into the cab on this this excavator there. A guy had to walk in chest deep water to fire that thing up because the air intake was high. He was able to fire it up and get it out of the flood water. But anyway, that was that stream bank work. We've done a couple acres of wetlands. I planted a few hundred oak trees, and we have so much deer pressure that there's wire around every one of these trees until they get to be 12, 15 feet tall. We run goats and sheep. The goats and sheep love poison parsnip. It's just so gratifying to see them chew down something with several hundred seed in it, you know, that are going to be my next year's headaches. So the goats and sheep, we've been doing that now for 12 years, 6-8 weeks a year in the spring. That's me on the mower there. That was a 4-acre cornfield that we converted to prairie, and in the first year you got to mow it several times because prairie likes to germ in the sun, and so yeah, that was gave me an excuse to buy a riding mower. But yeah, lots of different things have gone on there, and they all serve the mission of biodiversity and carrying capacity. So yeah, we've put in the first snake hibernacula put in on private lands in the state of Wisconsin. A big rock pit lined with fabric cloth, and several different species like to overwinter underwater actually. And so, but you know, it's with the fact that the efforts are now protected is just the best thing. I've enjoyed every bit of it, and it's you know, beaver dams and beaver dam analogs, post-assisted log structures. I've taken dry thistle, reed canary areas, and with a couple days work, turned them into a wetland just by putting post-assisted log structures and spreading that surface water out. And anybody has any interest in this kind of stuff, I love to, you know, you can come out and take a look at my place, or we can talk about it some other time. But it's really the low-tech process-based restoration is something that I'm in. And Douglas Ptolemy and his planting natives for biodiversity. So we planted hundreds and hundreds of native shrubs and trees. And anyway, Mississippi Valley has been a great partner all the way along.
So once a landowner has made the decision and entered into the process of the conservation easement with the Conservancy, the next steps are Mississippi Valley Conservancy does legal due diligence. We do a title review of the property. We check to see what kind of utility corridors, neighboring easements, liens pertain to the property. Mineral claims are something that comes up every so often, in which we've had landowners who have not realized that a third party held mineral rights or a percentage of the mineral rights to their property. These are all things that affect a conservation easement. Property boundaries are also important. We look for the survey markers, we define where those boundaries are and determine if there's any encroachments or if there's a need for a legal survey. We check to see old farm dumps. This is something that's pretty common to most farm properties throughout the Midwest, and the things that we check for is it a standard old farm dump that has broken glass and some rolls of old woven wire fence, or is it something with leaky 55-gallon drums of hazardous waste where we might want a professional to take a look at what those impacts are. There's something called a BRRTS review, which is the Bureau of Reclamation and Remediation for the state of Wisconsin, and that is a website that has a database of hazardous waste issues. The primary thing we see in this area is when there's things like train derailments. If it affects private properties, we're able to find the record of that. And one of the last steps in a conservation easement is the development of a baseline documentation report, also known as a property report. This is a document that is our written documentation of the condition of the property at the time the easement is conveyed. We have a written history, a written record of what's currently on the property, what the history of the property was. We include maps, aerial, topographic, LiDAR, plat maps, county maps. We include photos. If you can see on this map, every single white square that you see, it's a little bit far away, but each one of those has an arrow. Every single spot there is where a person stood and took a photograph in the direction that arrow is pointing. And every 10 years we retake the exact same photograph to show the changes to the property over time. We also take additional photographs as land uses change or if there's something that requires documentation. And Tom is just now in his 10-year anniversary, so our team will be out retaking all of the photos that we took for that original easement. The reason we take such good records of the condition of a property is that our role is to monitor and enforce those easement restrictions. We expect that at some point into the future, someone is going to challenge that easement. The primary challenge that we have had to deal with has been timber theft from a third party. In a situation like that, it's no longer the landowner's problem to deal with, it's our problem to deal with together. And it's our role to make sure that that property is taken care of. We do an annual site visit. Once the conservation easement is signed and recorded, we meet with the landowner at least once a year to talk about plans for the land, what are the changes that have occurred over the year, what are plans, new changes that are expected to occur. We hike around and take a look, take photographs, and document the condition of that property. A conservation easement can provide additional benefits, one of which is peace of mind, of knowing that no matter what happens to your property in the future, the restrictions that you place through that conservation easement remain in place. We also share opportunities for cost share funding or grant funding. If we know a landowner is interested in pursuing a pollinator planting or planting trees or a wetland restoration, we help to find resources to connect that landowner with to make those projects a reality. We also have an intern crew. We recently expanded our intern crew to 2 groups of 2. There's 4 in each crew. And these are professionals, college students who are interested in gaining professional experience in the natural resources field. Throughout the interview process, we always ask, why are you applying for this job? What's your interest? And we always hear, I really want a job working outside. By the end of the summer, these students know for sure if they do actually want a career working outside. The intern crew goes out to help landowners. Right now, we don't quite have the capacity to visit every single property, but they'll help with clearing trails, pulling wild parsnip, pulling sweet clover, cutting brush, working on invasive species control. And the most beneficial part of that internship is their opportunity to meet with landowners and learn about what people are doing on their property and how they have managed their land and what they've learned over decades of land management. Overall, you are making decisions today for the future of your property. A conservation easement is one way to ensure that those decisions remain in place in perpetuity. We have materials sitting on the counter over here. I also have a sign-in sheet if anyone would like to sign up to receive additional information about conservation easements. And both Tom and I are available to answer questions that you have. Thank you.